Alright, hello everyone, my name is Disc, and in this video we're going to talk all about how to min-max our shields. So coming from Dragonflight, we have had a major change to one of our shield spells, Rapture. It is a lot different than it used to be, and it opens the door for a lot of really fun variants in how we play it and how we min-max it. And I hope, even if most of this video, these are ideas you've already mastered or already know about, I hope anyone who's watching this, there's at least something you can take away from this video. But if you're new to my channel, thanks for tuning in. This is mainly a Mythic Plus channel. I try and do videos once per week. I do think a lot of what we talk about here can carry over to other modes of play. And also quickly before we start this video, a shameless plug for my Metafy. This is a really amazing website I've been partnered with now for about over a year probably. And whereas I think my videos here do a lot of good for the community, if you're really interested in learning a little bit more about discipline and leveling up your gameplay, I'm always going to lean into a one-on-one environment for coaching. It is a lot better way for me to pinpoint where you might be having specific loss. We can set up your add-ons. I also offer gameplay reviews. I think there's a lot of value in those as a student, and we can get a lot done over there one-on-one. Also, if you're interested in any of my UI elements, those are open to all of my students or any members of the Metafy or YouTube channels. So I've had the idea to make this video for a couple of weeks now, and mainly it's because one of the biggest qualms I hear throughout the community is when the pet and rift are out, people feel very comfortable, but they don't really know what to do when they don't have the pet. So I hope this video answers some of those questions. We have a lot of really powerful spells outside of the pet. You have to play them differently, you have to know how to play them, you have to know how to bank into talent synergy, so we're going to cover all that in this video. Alright, so here we have the shield. So starting out, noticing its cooldown text is in green. This means the cooldown is affected by your haste, but for the sake of this video, we're just calling it a 6-second cooldown. And then we have Train of Thought. Primarily, I think this is for our penance, but it does have some play with our shielding. And then on the right side of the screen, we have two basic minigames. These are totally passive, but the more thought and effort you can give them, the more you'll get out of your spec. So Words of the Pious, every time we shield, we add a fleeting 15-second 10% buff to our smite. This also applies to our Void Blast. So this is something you want to try and keep rolling, especially if you have a rift out. So just as far as a sequence goes, before I send my pet and or a rift, the last thing I try and do is a shield. So I can go into my window with an extra 10% buff. Then we have Protector of the Frail. So every time we cast shields, it reduces the cooldown of Pain Set by 3 seconds. So this is pretty major, to be honest, and I don't think anyone's perfect at it, but in practice, we need to keep our shields rolling, and that's for our Pain Set reduction. And then both of these minigames we are going to talk more about in the next slides. And then honorable mentions, I brought in Body and Soul and Blaze of Light. I think it was a couple weeks ago, but someone commented on my channels that Priest is a wheelchair class, and I'm just thinking, oh god, they heard that somewhere, you know what I mean? I don't think we're that slow. I mean, I think we're actually faster than a lot of people. You kind of just have to know what's up. So I like Body and Soul. This is great for giving it to others as well. So for example, there's a lot of mechanics where a tank has to run out or in. A little speed boost does a lot to really help a pull get started or help mitigate mechanics. Also on a pull gather, on the start of a pull, I like to Body and Soul the tank just to help them out a little. And then Blaze of Light. So this is where I don't really think we're a wheelchair class if you just kind of use it right. So let's say you died and there's a run back. What I'll do is kind of bounce back and forth between feather and shield, and then I'll penance myself on my feathers. And you can get really, really quick. And the last thing to note about these standard 6-second shields is you should be in good practice of considering these one extra layer of defense. So you can always give it to yourself anticipating attacks and give yourself a little bit more cushion. And before we talk more about shields, I wanted to take a quick tangent to talk about some weak Rs and add-ons we can use to help min-max our shields. And a lot of these ideas I think my viewers will have already heard, but I wanted to lead with one I think you've not heard. So a lot of times you'll hear me preach about using spells in between combat. Even if there's nothing to attack, we can still think about min-maxing our spells. Radiance in between combat is a great idea, and then also shields in between combat. And then one thing I came up with only last night, I used to be doing it manually, but I found a way to do it kind of automatic, and it takes a lot of the work out of it, macroing shields with our mount. So 6 of our 8 dungeons require mounting, and you can always precast a spell with your mount. I was doing that manually, but I found a solution to kind of do it without even thinking about it. And it's the add-on called Light Mount. If you want to do it, I think this is the best and only way to do it reliably. But if you just follow these steps, it's pretty easy to do. I think you can accomplish it in a matter of like a couple minutes. But it's the add-on called Light Mount. You can set a favorite flying mount. You can set a favorite ground mount. And then it has this setting. It's called the Advanced Options. You'll have to go in there and then add one line to the field. So you have to hit the unlock button. All of this is already in there. All we have to add is the first line. So it's a precast at player power word shield. And so anytime you mount, it's going to precast it with a shield. And then we have to add in this line for the combat. This is for Dawnbreaker, but it looks just the same. And then all you have to do from here is set your whatever your standard keybind is for mounting. Go into the keybind section and change your keybind within Light Mount, and it'll pull from those macros, and you'll always precast a shield before you mount, getting free CVR of your paint set. And the next tool we need in order to min-max our shields is Grid 2. I do think this is going to be the best solution for Disc Priests. If you play any other healer, I don't think it matters. But for Discipline, we really want Grid 2, and that's for how it overlays shield values. They all grow from the left to the right, just as the health does. And then it gives us this representation as an opaque overlay of shield values. So in this scenario, where we're kind of paused in time, you would not want to hit Disc with another shield, because likely this is a crit, this is holding Wheel and Woe, and this is holding Tier Set. So when it comes to casting any spell, you have 2 values. It can either land as a crit or a non-crit. They don't add together, and you don't want to hit Disc again because it's 100% likely to downgrade. And then same with the 3 DPS, it looks like the Ret Paladin is holding a crit, whereas the other 2 are holding non-crits. If we have one more shield to give, we don't want to touch the Ret Paladin because it's a roll of the dice, and it's either going to land the next time as a crit or a non-crit, and more likely the non-crit. So when we can see these values and we stack our bars vertically, it gives us the best advantage at comparing the values at a quick glance. And then the next add-on we're going to talk about is Little Wigs and Big Wigs. It is a theme of mine you'll hear in all my videos, but a clear and concise minimal UI is actually going to be stronger for you than, one of those spaceship UIs. So with these add-ons, when you download them, they have every single spell enabled, which is not the intended use. The intended use is based on your role, based on your class. You customize it to fit your needs, and these add-ons, if you use them without customizing them, you might actually be better off just not using them at all, because it takes this add-on, which is meant to be your alert system, your alarm system, and if it's beeping at you for everything, your brain actually literally starts tuning it out. And these alarms serve no purpose except cluttering your screen. So the rule of thumb here is less is more. We really only want to track timers of spells that have to do with timing our spells. For example, a frontal, ground damage, things like that, they have nothing to do with timing our heals, so we don't need to track their timers. So every boss, every trash pull, generally there's only one timer we have to track, and customizing your big wigs to fit that need is going to be a really powerful tool for you. And similarly, we have this WeakR where it puts spell CDs on nameplate. So Big Wigs does have that feature built in, but it's kind of imperfect. I use both of these solutions in tandem with each other, but I think you could get away with just one. But in the same vein as Big Wigs, Little Wigs, we want to use this add-on sparingly. Per trash pull, per boss, we really only want to be tracking 1 or 2 spells. We don't want to see every single spell of every mob on the screen, because then we're having to pick out which one's important for us. It is much better as a healer just to track the one that has to do with timing our spells. So a less is more approach is definitely what you want to do with these add-ons. And so next we have the targeted cast WeakR. This is very, very important for us as a Disc Priest. I think that goes for any healer, to be honest. But in order to use our talents and our spellbook to its best advantage, we have to find a proactive stance and be able to heal people before they take damage. And that is one of the best utilities a healer can bring, is shielding. So the idea with this is it's following the same principles as the other ones. Less is more. It's only tracking key targeted casts. I think about half of them are tank slams, and then the other half are key targeted spells that are in party. And the idea is you're going to see a white dotted line appear. It hooks to the grid 2 of the person being cast on. the idea here is you want to shield them before they take that hit. And I think pretty much any time there's a white dotted line, you do want to use your shield. A lot of times this lines up with our Wheel and Woe, which is great. And just for example, if the white dotted line, if the tank is receiving a tank slam, you also want to shield them if you can, but this might also indicate a preemptive pain sup. So this is a really nice weak aura to get ahead of damage, and preventing damage is one of the better things you can do as a healer. And then the last weak aura we're going to talk about is one that I made. It is tracking the count of our Rapture. So we definitely want to take the Exaltation for a +2 on the Rapture shields. And I think this is a pretty intuitive way to kind of track the count. It's using the same graphic as Rapture even. I hook it, currently it's below my player frame, considering it a player resource. But the idea here is whenever we hit Rapture, we want to play all of these shields. There's too much value to be had. We don't want to let them go to waste, and we need to see how many we have in order to plan accordingly. And the way this weak aura works is it shows you your count. Rapture, we're going to talk about it more, but it is a very comfortable buff. We don't really have any rush to play them, but at the same time, we don't want any to go to waste. So as we're approaching, I have it set to the last 8 seconds of the cooldown window. These icons will turn red. And this is kind of letting you know you're running out of time and you kind of got to hurry up and get those shields out. All right, and now back to the task at hand. Let's talk about a handful of ways we can use Rapture on its own as a cooldown. So a couple of rules of thumb here is I don't like giving Raptures to tanks. They do a lot better holding renews. And I'm not saying that in absolute terms, but I usually don't like giving Raptures to tanks. These absorb values are much better on those in your party who are squishy. And then we definitely want to take Exaltation. It is too good to pass up those 2 extra shields. So something to think about here is the Rapture itself counts as 1, and then we get +5. So anytime we Rapture, we're getting 6 buffed shields. And then one thing I always think about when it comes to Rapture is if I ever have a pain sup on cooldown, I highly prioritize getting Rapture out. It is a really nice CDR grab for our pain sup, which we are going to talk about more in a moment. But I think the most common use of Rapture is coding the party anticipating group-wide hits. So again, in these opportunities, you do want to dodge the tank. Shields are much better on those who are squishy in your party. And I might start this Rapture ramp about 8 to 10 seconds anticipating the hit. And we really need to think about how our other talents are going to play a factor here. And we really want to do everything we can to multiply these values together and these buffs together. So anticipating group-wide hit. A good rule of thumb with Rapture across the board is lead into it with a Radiance. And what this is going to do is it's going to buy you extra bolts with Harsh Discipline. Those extra bolts are going to now dip into Wheel and Woe, and having the entire party atoned before your Rapture is going to dip into our Mastery. So anyone who is atoned is going to take a harder hitting heal, and it's a really nice way to get a little bit more out of your Rapture. And I like to start these Rapture ramps about 8 to 10 seconds before a hit, and that's because if I need to revisit someone, if their shield's depleted before the hit, we have extra shields left over and extra time to give them one more global to cover them for that hit. And then the next way that's a pretty common way of using Rapture on its own is a little bit more lax of an approach with no rhyme or reason. We can kind of just throw this out to get, extra healing output. We can also just throw this out if we're trying to get CDR of our Protector of the Frail. But we still want to think about using our talent synergy to buff these Raptures. So Wheel and Woe is a great capstone talent that does buff Raptures as well. So it's always going to buff your next shield, and if it's a Rapture, it's going to double dip. So within our Rapture window, it's pretty comfortable. It's a 30-second window. We can at least buff 2 to 3 of our shields without even thinking about it. So I might be doing other things, keeping renews on tanks, casting Radiance for the bolts, casting Penance for the Wheel and Woe, and then a Rapture. And you can pretty easily kind of find this back and forth between regular spells and Raptures, trying to buff at least 2 of them from Wheel and Woe. And then the third way we can go about using Rapture and shields is more for single target healing. And I wanted to use the last hallway of Grim Batol as our example. We have really large single target hits in party. We can actually see those coming with the targeted cast weak aura. So in a perfect scenario, we're going to anticipate the attack coming, we're going to Rapture them ahead of time, and then using our grid 2, we can very clearly see that shield absorb overlay. We can see when the shield is depleted, and then we can weave in shields in between the ticks of damage. The way it goes there is the tempo of the ticks of damage is about the same as our global. So we kind of want to find the syncopated rhythm where we're weaving shields in between the ticks of damage. And I try and give 2 to 3 to 4 shields to one person to mitigate that attack, not to forget that they're still atoned, so you can go back to attacking enemies to recover the rest of the health. And another way we can use Rapture as a single target heal, using that same attack as the example. This is something you're going to have to do as you get into higher level keys, but anticipating that single target hit coming, we want to Rapture them before it lands, and then very often we're going to have to give a defensive penance proc, so from Harsh Discipline into one person. A defensive penance is the best we can do for single target healing. It's still going to dip into Wheel and Woe, and so after we give a defensive penance, we can cap them with a Wheel and Woe super buffed Rapture, and that's about the best we can do for single target healing, is pulling from all of our resources just to keep someone alive. And the last example I want to talk about on this slide is using Rapture primarily for a CDR grab of Paints Up. So again, if I ever have a Paints Up on cooldown, I move Rapture to the top of my prio list just to make sure I'm getting that CDR grab. And something you can consider, I try and do it when I can, at least one of these, but you can lead into your Rapture with a regular shield, and you can also close it out with a regular shield. So you're getting more CDR this way. It's 8 shields total. Each shield itself, the global, is 1 second. So using Rapture in this way gives you over 30 seconds of CDR for your Paints Up. All right, and lastly, this is where things get a little more complicated. We're getting into the nitty-gritty of these spells, and it's when we're comboing Rapture or shields with our Rift. So a lot of times you'll hear me talk about a half rotation. Generally, any given trash pull has time for 2 Rifts, but only 1 pet. So we lead with the pet and the Rift, and on the latter half of the pull, we have just the Rift. And there's a lot we can do here, even though it's arguably less output. There's a lot of other talents we can lean into to ensure we're getting the most out of it. And a couple things of a couple notes here. So Darkening Horizon, we can extend the duration of the Rift by 3 seconds, not hard to do. And then the Collapsing Void, every bit of penance we cast empowers the Rift. And with the extension, we can get 2 penance into the Rift, and that's if we're banking on the talent Train of Thought. So this is where we really have to do those smites in order to get the second penance. It is not hard to do, but we want to always try and get 2 penance into our Rift. And when you compare this rotation to that of our Mindbender, there is a lot less to do. It's a lot less complicated. Mainly we have more time to do other things, i.e. cast shields. So something to think about here when you take like a little bit of a step back. Our half rotation is only asking for smites and penance, and that's exactly what our tier set is. So when we're in our half window, we can either use Rapture shields or just regular shields, but we really want to dip into these other resources to make sure we're getting the most out of it. And the first way we can combo shields with our Rift is the more preferred method, and this is banking on DPS and Atonement healing. But there's the sequence at the bottom. We always want to get these first 3 in sequence before we have any interruption. So Shield, Mind Blast, Penance. We really want those 3 in sequence. The Mind Blast always precedes the Penance. And then now we're in the gap in between our 2 Penance where we have 4 spells. This is what I call backloading the Radiance. It's going to create a longer heal window and a less steep drop off with your heals. Sometimes you have to front load it, just the situation calls for it. But what happens if you move that number 4 to number 1, you will provide atonement coverage for the collapse, which is the primary reason we cast the Radiance. But the atonements are going to drop immediately after the collapse, creating this steep drop off with no healing in group. So when you can, I try and get the 3 blasts for the extension first, then the Radiance, what I call backloaded. And we always want to plan this Radiance, as primary reason is for atonement coverage for the collapse. But we're also dipping into Harsh Discipline. We're buying extra penance bolts. And then we want to do this because the Rift is still out. So we get these extra penance bolts, cast the buffed penance. It's going to empower the Rift further. And then at this point, we can expect our Wheel and Woe and tier set to be charged. So that's why we want to drop 1 more shield at the end here. And this is also going to reactivate our Words of the Pious. And when it comes to this type of rotation at the end of a pull when not much is happening, this is a time generally I give these buffed shields to a tank. And that's just to give them a little bit of extra help so we don't have to pop cooldowns, and just to make sure they are atoned for the collapse. And the last example I want to highlight of comboing Rapture and Rift is a little bit more unconventional, but a good thing to kind of have in your back pocket, especially as you're getting into higher keys. So unlike the previous example where we can stand still and attack, leaning into our DPS spells and atonement healing, this is a rotation to consider in at least 2 fights that come to mind, the first boss of Arakara and the mini boss of City of Threads. So this is a great way to combo the spells and really get the most out of your book. But being that we have to move, we're not going to be able to get smites, so we're not going to be able to bank on our train of thought. We're kind of going to be foregoing that CDR, and we're going to be forfeiting that second penance into the Rift. But that's kind of okay. So we want to send the Rift out, give it 1 penance, and then we totally abandon the Rift, letting it be a passive talent, and then we Rapture on top of it. So the idea here is anticipating the incoming attack. We want to cast our Mind Blast and Radiance butting up right to the start of the attack. And that's because those 2 spells we can't cast while moving. And then from there on out, the Penance followed by the Rapture Shields, we can cast all of those while moving, just using our Grid 2 to make sure we refresh shields as needed in group. This will also leave behind healthy atonements in party, allowing you to continue attacking when the attack ends. But that does conclude this video. I think I covered just about every way we can use shields and raptures to our advantage. This is a really important subject to be comfortable with and know the ins and outs of our talents in order to sustain our output even when our pet is on cooldown. So I hope that answers some questions for you. Please let me know if any of these ideas were new for you. But again, if you're looking to level up your gameplay, please consider a private lesson with me over on Metafy. We've been having a lot of really good success over there. Also, if you're interested in any of my UI elements, they are open to all of my students through Metafy, or any supporters of the channel that join the Metafy or YouTube. So please go check those out. Let me know if you have any questions, and until next time, Disc.